Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. So one of the things that you have an advantage over from other people, despite all the headaches and the stress that it causes, is you're not really wondering, what does your future look like in the broader sense, right? When you're not beholding to a larger company and thinking about what skills are going to be in demand and that sort of stuff. What happens if there are mass layoffs? Like, you might have some difficult decisions to make, but no one's going to lay you off. And
it is true that I don't plan on firing myself.
Well, then you'd lose your health benefits, and I don't think you want that.
Yeah, you know what's funny? Every once in a while, I get somebody that will say something along the lines of, I want to go start a business, I want to work for myself. And I'll ask them, why? And not infrequently, I get the answer, I don't want to have a boss. I'm like, well, then don't go work for yourself, because let me tell you something. You won't not have a boss. You're just going to change having one boss for lots of them. And here's the bad part about the bosses that I work for. If you go to get fired, you're going to likely have 1, 2, maybe 3 conversations with HR, whoever else, and they're going to say, Steve, your performance is not really what we expect here at Corporation XYZ, and we want to see that improve. And you'll get an opportunity. And if they don't do those things, if they don't give you a cause and they don't lay it out for you, then you wind up with a lawsuit saying wrongful termination, right? In my case, I was explaining this to one of my kids the other day. I mean, they could just decide that the wind changed directions and that, well, we're going to go a different direction with a different IT provider. They don't even have to tell me, right? They'll just stop calling one day. And so to a degree, there is a level of, diversification that comes with it that I very much appreciate. And I would also tell you, and I don't necessarily believe that this is why you brought it up, but I credit you 100% with this. We made a change to Altispeed about 5-6 years ago, if not entirely predicated, mostly predicated on a conversation you and I had offhandedly in your hotel room at a conference. And that conversation, at that point, I was so proud of the fact that I'd never, ever, ever lost a client. I would tell everybody, since 2009, since we started, we've never lost a client. We've never, ever, ever lost a client. And I was so proud of that. And I took it so much as a badge of honor that I lost sight of what doing it at the next level might look like, because I was so focused on making sure to keep every client we ever had. And the reality that you opened my eyes to is not all clients are good clients. Some clients is okay if they go somewhere else. And in fact, it's really actually beneficial if they go somewhere else. And what that does is it opens the door then for better clients, for higher paying clients, for bigger clients. But you don't necessarily have the opportunity to do that if you're clinging over bad clients. And so I went from, and this is not an exaggeration, I went from taking 2 A-frame ladders and balancing the one each on a staircase and then putting a ladder across the 2 A-frame ladders so I could reach an access point that was, 50 some feet in the middle of this stupid stairwell, all for the privilege of charging a hotel $1 per month per room, and it just really wasn't worth risking being a quadriplegic the rest of my life. And I don't know that I really realized that until you and I had that conversation. And so, yeah, there is a diversification that comes from it. And there is a certain piece that comes with, I don't really have to worry. If I lost a client tomorrow, it'd be okay. It'll get replaced something else. The other thing, though, I would tell you, and this is not going to be for everybody, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but it's just true. I believe that there is a cosmic marionette of sorts that strings all of this stuff together And I find that the more that I live into that and the more that I surrender to that, the easier that becomes. And there's a certain piece that comes with that too, that I don't really care what flag I'm flying or what flag I'm doing the thing under. I have a very specific thing that I am supposed to be accomplishing in life, and I'm going to pursue that, and I'm going to run through that door, and it'll come with different flags, and it'll come with different paychecks, and it'll come with different challenges, and it'll come with different benefits, and it'll come with different amounts of fun. But there is a level of, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and the people who want to pay for it will pay for it, and the people that don't will not.
And I suppose Noah doesn't know that I'm going to do this, but you've actually made some expansions recently to AltaSpeed. You've kind of branched out. Are you ready to talk about that a little bit?
A little bit. I want to be a little cautious on names until I think I know what you're going to talk about. I want to be a little cautious on names until the process is finalized. But yeah, what is this kind of where you're going?
Yeah, I was just thinking so I'll split this out a little bit. I was thinking about the difference between the responsibilities that you have to have as a business owner to continually think about serving your clients versus the person that is being employed by a business having to think about what sort of skills am I competing against? And they're different worries. You're not necessarily worried about the skill. You're worried about the thing that you're offering, whereas the people working for you have to worry about the skill. And so I was thinking those things tied together with some of the directions, one of the things that's always interesting about AltaSpeed is the diversification that you are capable of doing, like lights at weddings, and you do everything from hotels to lawyers' offices to doing parties if you're so asked to do that because you happen to have people with the skill set to accommodate that.
Yeah, 100%. So a couple of things there. I think the first thing is the one of the things that I try to coach other people on when they ask me, they'll say, I think about getting into IT. Why? If the answer to that question is, I want to make lots of money, I'm like, don't bother. Don't get into this career field. You won't like it. And the reason for that is I don't work 8 to 5. I don't punch out at 5 o'clock and then I go home and hang my hat up and stuff. I work on this stuff all day long. And when I get done work on this stuff, I go home and I play with it down in my basement. And I've joked with clients many times, if you don't give me a project to work on, my wife will suffer because I will go home and I'll be working on, I'll just make up projects and I'll go do it. And if I'm on vacation, I've got projects I bring to the hotel, and it's a non-stop thing. And it doesn't feel like a job. It doesn't feel like work. It's very much a function of, I want to accomplish a particular thing and I enjoy it and I like digging down the rabbit hole. And so, yeah, there's absolutely a function of what's coming up next. The interesting thing about that, Steve, and this is absolutely true with the thing that you're talking about, oftentimes I don't go looking for these things. Oftentimes they arrive at my doorstep. And the analogy that I would give is a man is at a market and a young boy comes up and says, I want to buy a ping pong ball. Do you have any ping pong balls for sale? And the man says, I don't have any ping pong balls. I've got tennis rackets and I have baseballs and I have beach balls. I have no ping pong balls. Okay. The kid walks away. And the next day the kid comes back and he goes, I'll buy a dozen ping pong balls from you. Do you have any ping pong balls for sale? And the man says, I told you this yesterday. I got baseballs. I got beach balls. I got tennis rackets. I don't have any ping pong balls. Stop asking me. It doesn't matter if you want to buy 1 or 10 or 12. It doesn't matter. I don't have any ping pong balls. The third day, the boy comes up and asks, I'm interested in how many dozens would you like to buy? And the man turns around with a box of ping pong balls, right? Moral of the story is, at some point, when a person or when a client or when people come and repeatedly ask you for a thing, it behooves you to find your way to yes, right? Whether or not you thought you were going to be, whether or not it was a thing. Now, there are lines, there are guidelines, there are things that guide us that say this is a good decision, this is a bad decision, this is an ethical way to do it, this is an unethical way to do it. So not everything is necessarily a yes, but there are wise ways to find a way to yes, and that the evolution that you so eloquently alluded to largely isn't driven by me, Steve. It's oftentimes driven by needs, and my incessant need, and anybody that's been around me for 5 seconds will know this is true. I like doing things for people. I love it. And so if you ask me to do a thing and I'm incapable or ill-prepared to do that thing, then I become very passionate about wanting to go learn what the next thing is or get involved with the next company or do whatever it is I have to do so that the next time you come asking for ping pong balls, I've got a dozen of them for sale.
Well, I hope you have lots of ping pong balls in your backstop.
Absolutely. More to come on ping pong balls. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. You're on the air with Steve and I. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Hey, good evening, guys. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
Awesome. So I've been really wanting to get into owning my own media, and that's something y'all talked about passionately. I tried to take a route with a built-in DVD drive. I couldn't get a DVD to rip with a Make MKV. Bought a $25 one off Amazon. It won't rip, and so I Googled it, and it says you have to have a certain firmware. They'll sell you one that's already got the firmware for like $250, $300. So I wanted to see if y'all had one that you could recommend that you like, or, if you have any guides to the firmware or anything I can get this so I can quit relying on unreliable streaming services.
Great question. Steve, what do you like for Blu-ray drive?
So I can give you the part number. I'll put it in the show notes because it's kind of obnoxious to read out. But I specifically went hunting for something that I could unlock, like region unlock, and also basically enable the ripping. Because like you said, the issue is that most of these drives are coming with the ability to rip your own media disabled. So I went out and specifically got one that does 4K. So I actually have a Blu-ray player that's just kind of hanging around that I was using for ripping beforehand, and then I wanted to start ripping 4K stuff, so I got a second one. But I can absolutely get that in the notes, as well as the version of firmware that I'm currently using, and I can try and dig up it was not at all hard for me to follow the flashing guide for this, although it was some time ago. So I'm not sure if the unit that I have is still for sale. Do you have something specific that you're using, Noah?
I do. So, big picture, I've had really good luck with LG Blu-ray drives. Now, to your point, I've also gotten to the point where I punch in LG Blu-ray drive and I'm seeing $280, $300 on Amazon, and I about want to fall over. So I went on a quest a few years back to find a cheapo drive that would do the same thing. And I believe I found one. It's called, it's made by a company called MTHS Tech. We'll have a show notes, we'll have a link for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. Now, here's my disclaimer. Does it work? It does work. Does it rip the vast majority of DVDs I've thrown through it? It does. Are there times where I have had it to where it didn't rip a disc? I have. The way that I have chosen to work around this, because I'm cheap, is I went on eBay and I just went and bought some drives that would allow me to change the region on them, or bought the drive that already had the region. Then I just have a little box, and it is labeled optical drives, and I just have my little collection of cheapo drives, and I, like a popper, I just kind of cycle through them. Does it rip in that one? Nope. Does it rip in this one? Nope. Does it rip in this one? Nope. The error that you're getting in Make MKV, let me guess. It says something along the lines of it's a IO error, and when you read it or when you Google it, it gives you the answer that this is caused by a problem with the optical drive. It's not a fault of Make MKV, right?
Yes, sir.
Yep. So your troubleshooting is on the right step. It is a problem with the drive. It is something you need to swap. I, like you, do not enjoy the idea of spending $300. I will tell you this: I am on the verge or on the cusp of building a new desktop. And when I build that new desktop, I will likely put in a 3.5-inch optical drive specifically for the purpose of doing things like ripping, and that drive will be an LG drive, and I'll probably break down and spend the $275 or $280 to do it, because I know for sure that it will work. But I tell you what, if you take a look at the Amazon link that that I'll send you, and Steve's going to give you a link to a Walmart drive, the one that he bought. If you don't have any luck with either one of those, you give us a call back, and I will put you in contact with one of the nerds at Altispeed, and they'll ship you a drive.
Oh, guys, that's fantastic. I just want to say thank you for that, and thanks for all that y'all do every week, because it is one of the highlights of my week, getting to listen to y'all nerd out and me nerd out in spirit. So I appreciate y'all.
You bet. We appreciate the call. Thanks for joining us tonight. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email live@asknoahshow.com. Our first email tonight comes in from Charlie. Charlie writes in and says, I came across this project. It seems interesting. An open source electromagnetic resonance tablet. And then he links to a Hackaday article. Steve, what the heck is an electromagnetic resonance tablet? I never heard of such a thing.
Well, I'd be lying if I said I understood it fully, but as I kind of read through the little summary, essentially it's a homemade tablet. So the tablet we're talking about is not like an Android tablet. It is a writing tablet that artists and people use that can do thicker lines if you push on it harder and all that sort of stuff. Like it's got that going on, and essentially it's a homemade version of that. And I thought that was pretty cool. And the demo shows the line getting thinner and thicker depending on how hard the person is pushing, and they're demoing it in Linux. So I thought that was pretty neat. I have a writing tablet for when I'm doing presentations or whatever with clients. So not something that I need, but I'm all for building your own stuff.
100%. The other thing I would tell you is my girls are ridiculously artistic. They love it. They spend all of their time. In fact, it was really adorable. One of my daughters is beaming ear to ear and comes out to the car, and the conversation goes something like this. How was your day, honey? It was awesome. I learned my talent today. Just tell me your talent. I can draw things. And I can draw animals, and I'm good at it, and it's my talent. And now I'm going to go to school, and I'm going to enter the talent competition, and I'm going to draw my animals. And that girl drew a wolf like you wouldn't believe. And so so in an effort to do that, I did two things. The first thing I did was I went down to our local art store, and I purchased a sketchbook. And when they come up with cool ideas or they do things that I think are cool, I'm like, hey, will you draw that for Dad? And so I'm collecting a little book, an actual old analog hard copy book of things, because it's an archaic way of doing things, and I appreciate it. The second thing that I did in order to embrace the nerd in me, I purchased some drawing tablets, some USB drawing tablets, very much like the tablet that Charlie recommended, but it's not the do-it-yourself version. It's a full-on commercial deal, and it actually came as a recommendation from a listener of the show, and it's the Gaomon Gaomon PD 1161 drawing tablet. But the thing that was really cool about them is it works perfectly with Krita. You just plug it in, USB device, fire Krita up, and then you can draw on the thing, and it shows up on the computer. The thing that I'm learning is if they don't have a screen, if it's just the tablet and there's no screen, they won't. It's not as engaging to them. If there's an actual screen on the tablet, and Gaomon makes one, it's $149. The 1161 does this. If it's a screen and then they can draw and they can see the actions of what they're doing, has a little bit more stickiness to it. But so I think these things are really great. I think they're particularly great for kids. I wish I were more artistic. I'm not. I'm actually pretty terrible at art. I struggle with stick figures, Steve, and I am. But if I was, I'd be more interested in this with myself, and I definitely appreciate it for kids. Tyler writes in and says, hi, Noah and Steve. I'm looking at getting security cameras at our lake home for a while now. We currently have 2 sets of 4 wireless cameras that go back to their own DVR. Due to the metal siding, it's often hard for the cameras to reach the DVR. Also, our thermostats use the same frequency, and oftentimes the cameras disconnect the thermostats because all 2.4 gigahertz. Due to all of the trouble, we've been thinking about going to a hardwired camera system. My question is, would you know of a good cost-effective security camera system that an average homeowner can buy and is pretty much do-it-yourself? I also know there's a lot of different variations of cameras out there between 12 megapixel, 16 megapixel, 4K, 2K. I have no clue what all that means. Any insight would be awesome. Thank you, Noah. So I'm going to give some basic best practices to follow. Then I'll let Steve chime in with the route that he's taken, and then I'll follow up with what I think you're going to find to be a fairly predictable answer coming from my mouth. So things that I would tell you, it doesn't matter what brand you're using, doesn't matter how you're doing it, you should follow these practices. The first, you ask about specifications. Be wary of specifications, okay? My kids bought a 20 megapixel camera for $19 at Walmart one time, okay? The idea that that is going to compete with a 20 megapixel Nikon full frame DSLR is laughable. Okay. Not all megapixels are the same. Okay. Just because resolution is one metric of many. And so I would implore you in the strongest possible way to stay away from purely working off of one particular specification or the other. I get clients all the time when we're doing security camera consulting, and they will say things to me like, I'm looking at cameras and I think I want and then they'll give me like I need this particular resolution or that particular resolution. And I try to push them away from that because I don't really think that's a helpful way to go about it. I think the wiser approach is to do things like using first of all, deciding what it is you want out of the camera. So there's a couple of different, goals that you could aspire to. One is I just want to see what is happening. And we divide that into essentially 5 categories. One is an overview. So I want an overview of what's happening. I just want to see the parking lot and that there are little dots or little things moving around, and maybe I can understand some of them are cars and maybe some of them are people, but I certainly don't know who they are or what they're doing, okay? The next level is detection. So we can distinguish just an overview of here's the parking lot and things happen and things don't happen to something is happening, right? And that's where we can start to get into motion detection and those sorts of things. But we have an actual detectable event. We still can't necessarily identify anything. We can't necessarily observe who or what is happening, but we know something is happening versus something is not happening. The next level is what we call observe. Observe is somebody is doing something there. So no longer is it just an overview of here's a parking lot. No longer is it just there's a parking lot and something is happening. Now we can see that a person is doing a thing over there. We might not know who the person is. We might not know what they're doing, but we know that there is a person and we know that they are doing something. The next level is what we call recognition. That's where we take and say a person is sorting papers. I can't see what the papers are. I don't know who the person is, but I can definitely tell that's a person and they're sorting papers. And the highest level is identification. And that is Bob is sorting, papers next to his red Camry. And that's the highest level. When you go to do that, there's a very basic math equation that comes into play here. Identification requires 60 to 80 pixels for identification. So you take the width in inches times the number of pixels, divide by the face, and what you get is the total resolution needed. So that is the formula if you're going to go for that highest level of identification, which even though people can't articulate it, oftentimes that's what they want. They want to be able to identify a thing, and they just don't know what they need to do to get there. And so that's what you need to do. And when you go to actually wire your cameras, and I cannot tell you how strongly I encourage your process of wiring cameras. I think you're going to have a way better result. I'll also tell you that maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, somewhere in there, we started running Cat 6 for cameras. We could see where the industry were going. We knew that they were eventually going to get to IP cameras, but at the time, IP cameras were hundreds and hundreds of dollars. They were very, very expensive. They were extraordinarily proprietary. They were very brand locked in. It was nothing that we were ever going to sell or support, but we knew the industry was going to go that way. And so at that time, even though we were installing analog cameras, we were pulling Cat 6 cable, or Cat 5, I suppose, at the time. And we took what are known as ballons and took just a twisted pair from a Cat 5 and put a BNC ballon in and connected analog cameras. And the reason that served our clients really well is 10 years down the road, when things did become standardized and ONVF became a thing, and now there's a bajillion manufacturers to include Chineseism and Taiwaneism, that cameras that are all out in the market, you can go and just take those BNC ends off, put a regular Cat5 RJ45 connector on it, crimp it down, plug it into a switch, and now you can upgrade to an IP camera, and you didn't have to re-pull any new cable. I explain all of that to say, done correctly, hardwiring will last you decades, and you won't have to ever go back and do it again. If I woke up in your shoes and I were pulling cameras in my house, I would do the following. I would buy some vertical outdoor cable, because if you're running it outdoors, you're going to get it outdoors. You're going to want the extra shielding and that sort of thing to get it outdoors. The second thing I would tell you is the really popular, if you just Google, like, what should I use for cable? Oftentimes they run across the Unify outdoor cable. 1, it's more expensive. 2, they have special ends that you're supposed to use. 3, I can count on one hand the amount of people that actually ground those things properly. And if you're not going to do that, and most people don't, it's not worth the time and the extra expense to go buy the Unify cable. And lastly, as a ham radio operator, I'll tell you, you can do all the grounding you want. You can tie all the various different things you want. If you get any sort of electrical activity by way of lightning or thunderstorm or whatever else, all bets are off. So maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but I'm going to tell you, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. I would pick up a roll of vertical cable. It will be much less expensive, doesn't require any special ends, but it has a really thick jacket. So when you're pulling it through things like steel, you're going to find that it's much more tolerant of jerking and bending and going around sharp things and all the rest of it. The last thing I would tell you is, when you're thinking about camera placement, there's oftentimes an impulsion to say, I'm going to just pull wires to where I think I want the cameras and then call it a day. I'm going to suggest you pull 2 runs to every camera, and here's why. If you don't know where to put cameras, I will pull 2 runs to all 4 corners of the building, and then put 4 cameras on the building, expanded eventually to 8, 1 pointing each direction, and then every point in the perimeter of the building has at least 2 cameras of coverage. And so an attacker, a malicious actor, is going to have to cross not 1, but 2 different things. So no matter which way they're facing, you're likely to catch their face. And then, using the algorithm I gave you earlier, you can figure out what resolution you need to be able to identify that person, and good luck getting past that perimeter without being able to get caught on camera. But if you didn't want to spend the money to do that, pull the wire to all those places anyway. Pull 2 runs to each one of those locations, and then what you do is just put 1 camera up. Even if you pulled 8 wires and only put 1 camera up, you'll thank me down the road, because the cameras are the expensive part. The real pain in the tuchus is the amount of time and effort and sweat and creative words that you're going to learn in getting the wires to all the places. So if you're going to do that, put 2 of them there. It gives you a direction, and unless you get into like these panoramic cameras, which are problematic for a number of reasons. One is they typically have a sweet spot in the lens, and then it gets blurry. Or you go to like a PTZ model, which can be good, but either requires somebody there to operate it, to look at what you're going to look at, and 2, now you have a moving part that can fail. It's oftentimes cheaper and easier just to get a camera pointed at every direction all at once. And in my opinion, the best way to do that is with multiple cameras. So I would run, if you're going to go through the trouble of running wire, pull 2 to each one of those locations. If you don't know where, go to the 4 corners. If you have an idea where you're going to go, at least pull 2 to those locations so you can go each direction. And then past that, what you put in is somewhat up to your choice. And so that's where I'm going to kind of turn it over to Steve. Steve, let's start with the heart of your system. I think it was now 2 years ago, we sat down at Southeast Linux Fest and spun up a new completely open source NVR solution. Really, it was at its infancy and it's grown. Tell me about that solution and what you've thought of it as you've lived in that world.
So we stood up Frigate, and back when we stood it up, it was less than easy. The documentation was confusing and all over the place. Like, there was a lot in the documentation, and it wasn't that the documentation itself was bad. It was like the documentation needed to be pruned, right? So you would find multiple documents that would talk about the thing that you wanted to do, and it would have conflicting information as if an old version got left up there. So that we struggled with that quite a bit. A couple of listeners actually dropped by the Ask Noah booth and kind of hacked on it with us in their own systems. And we eventually got it working. And we did a test thing at Self, right, with a couple of the cameras. We stole a couple of the cameras.
That was funny. So we went in, when he says we stole a couple of cameras, like we went into the cameras that they were using for doing the conference and we're like, we need to borrow these. And the guy's like, okay. Also, we might need to reset them and get some IP addresses, and we need to change some settings. And they were cool with it. They were all right. They understand. It was for the greater purpose of nerding, but we got it to work.
We did. It has come so far since then. I have been really happy with the way it's gone. It is still a technical project insofar as you still have to. I didn't find the camera adding, and I still don't, to be as awesome as an end user would like it, right? So you and I would have no problem. Documentation's gotten to the point where like you can read the documentation and know how to create a frigate config. And I would also argue with the way society is going right now, you could probably get an LLM to kick out a valid config as well. However, there were challenges with the specific cameras that I would have. So like some of them would stutter or whatever. So I'm actually doing some re-encoding on the camera streams instead of just taking them in straight. And so there was a little bit of learning for that. But in general, it is it's got the WAF factor, or the spousal approval factor, right? She uses it every day. So the only time it goes down, and part of this is because of the way that I have it set, it's running in a VM, and the VM has a mount from the host system where its disks are. So I'm mounting the disk into the VM. You follow me? Mm-hmm. So Frigate has a cleanup system, and every once in a while it'll delete the files. And the host that has the disks on it does not release the files. So when you look at the directory, it's gone, but you get a, hey, man, you're at 90%. And you look in the directory and you're like, there's like 4 files in here. What's going on? So every once in a while, seems to be every 9 to 12 months, I actually have to take the VM down, shut it down so that it releases all of the locks that it has on the files so that the host can actually respect the cleanup operations the VM is doing. And again, that's not really, the software has not crashed on me ever.
Yeah.
Since we worked through some of the initial stuff a couple of years ago. So it's not a stability thing. It's completely the way I have it set up.
So comparing apples to oranges. So right now, what we're doing for clients is and to be fair, I mean, in full disclosure, what I have in my house is I have a Synology disk station. I'm using Surveillance Station. To compare apples to oranges, if I gave you a budget of, let's say, $650 without drives and asked you to go buy a piece of hardware specifically to run Frigate on, how much of a challenge would that be? Would that be a walk through the park? Would that be...
Just for Frigate? Yeah, it would
just
be.
For Frigate.
Well, how many cameras are we talking?
Let's say for the sake of argument, 16 cameras.
Okay, so you're talking 16 cameras. Are you offloading any of the detection type triggers?
Yes. All of it gets offloaded. Let's assume, in my example, that all the NVR isn't responsible for any of the detection, any of that. That's all being handled by the cameras. It's just receiving the little API calls to say motion happened.
Well, let's do a live check here. So I have 7 cameras, and I will look. So I've got, now this is completely overkill because this is my quote AI box. So it's got a 5060 Ti in it. It is humming along right now at, let's say, 13% usage. It is currently drawing 22 watts. So It's not doing a ton, and it is processing 7 cameras, and there are some other processes that are waiting to be accessed. So,
okay, I got to ask, what do you have for a physical hardware, host that you're putting what'd you say, 5070 in?
It's a 5060 in this machine. I have an AMD EPYC server, and I put it in not a server case so that I could just mount it normally. So
you basically, I'm going to say back to what I think you're telling me. You have a 5060 mounted inside of almost like a tower desktop, and that's running a libvirt host, and then you have Frigate running as a VM guest, and it's passing through the graphics card. Is that accurate?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
So you obviously don't need a 5060. If 7 streams is kind of clocking in at about, somewhere between 10 and 12% of this GPU at 22 watts. So like the big thing there is this card can pull 180 watts. So if it's pulling 22 watts, it's barely doing anything. So I would say you could probably get away, you easily can get away with you could get a 5060 that's got 8 gigs, and you can get lots of those for fairly cheap, because nobody really wants the 8 gig versions of those cards, even in today's crunch, right? So yeah, you could probably do it for $650. Yeah, you could, because I'm offloading the work. The CPU doesn't need to be very big. It's loaded into RAM, into the VRAM, so the system doesn't need tons of RAM. I am currently using, this is my AI host. So it's got 32 gigs of RAM being used right now, but that's not all by Frigate. So yeah, you could easily do it inside of that. It would depend on how much you spend on the graphics card and skimp out other places. And then you'd need to, you know what? Let's qualify that. How are you doing the discs? Because discs have gotten expensive, and are you mirroring them?
Yeah, so this is why I say, in order to get a true apples-to-apples comparison, I think oftentimes open source gets a bad rap, not because of quality, but because we don't have a marketing department, right? And so we don't have anybody to put the polish on it. And so then the polish never gets put on, and then it gets evaluated against things that do have marketing and polish and all the rest of it. And then I feel like it kind of gets a bad rap, and that kind of drives me nuts. So this is why I say, to get a fair apples to apples comparison, the box alone, without drives, without anything at all, not licensing, nothing, it's going to set you back $500 plus, $560, I think. So let's call the empty just CPU, RAM, and computer $600. Then you have to add drives to it. So typically what I've done is I use the Seagate, I think they call them Skyhawks, and it's a drive specifically for surveillance, and it's the idea that you're going to be writing to it constantly. You also know that you're going to be overwriting constantly, and so it's built for that. And the way that I go about calculating that is I cheat, and I go to Access's website, and they will have a thing. They have a little calculator, and you can say, here's how many cameras I have, here's how often there's motion, and then it'll do a calculation on, okay, if you had these things recording 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, this many cameras, you would need X amount of disk space. That's how I use it to size it. And I'll typically then double that. So if, let's say, I would say the average system has a 6 terabyte disk in it, and then there's typically 2 for redundancy. And so 2 6 terabyte disks, I'd have to look it up, but I'm going to guess it's on the order of $300. So we'll say another $600. Skyhawk. Okay, $215. So, you're looking at another $400 per drive. So we'll call it $1,000 out the door for a box and drives. But here's where I think Frigate starts to pull ahead. With the Synology Surveillance Station, you have to buy a device license for every camera that you add. Now, in their defense, it is a lifetime license, it's perpetual, and it is transferable. That is to say, if the box ever crashes, if you ever need a new box, if you ever upgrade, if you ever do it, they are extremely flexible in letting you move those licenses from one to the other. In fact, the only time I've ever had to reach, most of the time, I stick it in, and as long as it doesn't see the other box still online, and even if it does, it'll just kick the licenses out. As long as it doesn't see the other device online, you don't even know, and it's like you've activated it for the first time. And the one and only time I ever ran into an issue was where it was an extraordinarily esoteric situation in which we had a thing running. We had those licenses tied to, as I recall it, a surveillance station account, and we tried to migrate it, and they were like, nope, can't do that. You have to sign into the surveillance station account, which makes sense because that's their way of, if you get an organization that has a few hundred cameras, you're talking some real money invested in licensing, so they want to make sure that never gets lost or somebody doesn't, lose a card or whatever, and all of a sudden you're out a few $100. So in that case, I had to call them and work through to get that surveillance station account reset. And then I was able to log in. And then again, licenses transferred just fine. So it's not, of the licensing schemes that are out there, So to compare and contrast this with ExactVision, ExactVision is one of the 800-pound gorillas in the industry. There's three. There's Genetec, Avigilon, and ExactVision. And those are the companies that, if you go into Las Vegas, if you go into banks, if you go into any big place, that is largely the 800-pound gorillas that you're working with. And ExactVision, I'm going to pick on them for a second. They charge $300 per license per year. Now, here's the most egregious part in my view. You buy, let's say, one device for $300, and let's say you let it sit for 3 years, and you don't pay the renewal fee of the $300. You go back and you want to add a second camera. Guess what? You have to write them a check for $900 for the license renewal that you didn't pay for the 3 years before they'll let you have the privilege of spending another $300 to add one more camera to your system. And so you basically, anytime I come across an ExactVision system and they go, yeah, we haven't been paying the licensing fee, I'm like, well, you may as well throw it out. And it'll be cheaper to buy a whole new system and replace it than it would be to try to add back into the system, because the licensing is so egregious. Synology doesn't do that. You pay one time. It's about $50. It works out to be about $50 per camera. You pay one time. You can buy one camera. You can come back 8 years later and buy one more camera and add to it. You can buy 4 at a time. You can buy 8 at a time. They're really flexible. So of the licensing things that are out there, I'd say they're the least egregious. But where I think that Frigate begins to pull ahead rather strongly is, you ain't got to monkey with any of that. You can add as many cameras as you want, whenever you want, and you don't have any cost to do it, which then opens up the ability of, I have to buy a piece of very special proprietary hardware, which, oh, by the way, they're now mandating which drives you can use in that proprietary hardware, and I don't get a seat at the table to have that conversation. You, on the other hand, can say, here's the virtual host I built for my AI thing. I'll just throw Frigate on it while I'm at it. You could run it on an Intel NUC. You could run it on a spare PC. You could buy a dedicated piece of hardware for it. And if I recall right, and I don't remember the Google Coral. So they have their own dedicated processor for doing, is it AI stuff? And then they recommend that for using with Frigate. Am my memory serving me correctly, Steve?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call it AI stuff, because this is just machine learning to do like object detection, that sort of stuff, right? So that stuff existed long before AI came into mainstream consciousness, but sure, let's call it AI stuff.
So they have, I guess my point being, they have stuff that makes this much more approachable for you, but there's no handcuffs, so you can do this however you want. And at the time that we demoed it, there was some. I would say it was still I would say that if you're willing to fight through the setup, which wasn't hard, it was just unclear. If you were willing to fight with the setup, it was perfectly usable in a home environment. I would say that there were absolutely some drawbacks that made it completely inappropriate for a business use. These days, I think it's pretty darn close. In fact, it's close enough to the point that we're playing with it by way of it. Every once in a while, we'll get a client, and there'll be a nonprofit or there'll be a church or something like that, and they'll say, we want cameras, but we can't afford $1,000 for an NVR. And Frigate is increasingly becoming the thing. As soon as I get a hardware thing dialed in, that I have a reputable hardware thing that I can go to and say, yep, let's buy this thing and get the cost down a little bit. Again, even if you matched it spec for spec, if I gave you $1,000 and said, go buy a piece of hardware with drives, you're still ahead of the game. By the time you add 8 cameras to it, you're going to be $1,000 in versus $1,500 in on Synology. And the more cameras you add, the more it skates into your favor. So I think Frigate is a huge contender. The other thing that I think that Frigate potentially opens the door to is quote unquote cloud-based cameras, right? So if you wanted to run your own cloud and you wanted to run Frigate, you could spin it up on DigitalOcean. You could spin it up on AWS. You could spin it up wherever you like. And then you can tie your cameras to it and have the ability to access those things without necessarily having to have all the hardware in one place at one time. So I think it's really making some awesome progress, and increasingly is appropriate for more and more production use. Let's talk about cameras a little bit. So I want to start with Amcrest. This is a company that I don't know if we've talked about before, but it's popular with a few listeners of the show. And the other thing that draws my attention to it is It is one of the cameras that's recommended by the Frigate Project at docs.frigate.video. If you go into their hardware recommendations, they recommend some Dahua cameras. I'm going to strongly encourage you in the strongest possible terms to stay away from Dahua. They're a Chinese company. It actively calls home to China. It's a bad choice. And Hikvision is even worse. It's another camera on the list. That's not just Chinese owned. It's actively owned by the Chinese government. So it's not like, are they doing malicious things? You can be 100% guaranteed malicious things are happening, or at least they have the ability to. Amcrest, on the other hand, might be a middle of the road. So I've linked the exact model that they have. I don't have any experience with it. I've heard very good things from the people that have purchased them, but your mileage may vary. Steve, you've had some really good luck with Reolink. Tell me about that.
I really like my Reolink cameras. So I had Axis cameras. They were really good, but you had to buy them used. And honestly, I think that they're more for if you're worried about somebody walking up and taking a baseball bat to the cameras. They are solidly made. I really like them. But when it was time to replace my Axis cameras, I ended up going with Reolink. I found that they fit the way my brain works better. So they've let me be clear about this. I'm specifically talking about the PoE wired versions. I have no experience with the Wi-Fi ones, and I understand that the experience is a little bit different there because of the way that they have to work. But on the wired cameras, they have built-in like web dashboards and all of that sort of stuff to do all the things you need to do, to include not having to have an application to set it up. So Home Assistant can talk to them right away. Well, let's put a caveat. Home Assistant can talk to them right away, but expects a password. So if you try and go into Home Assistant and try and set them up, it will look like it's working, and then it'll kind of fail. At least last time I set it up, it kind of fails silently. Mm-hmm. You just have to go into the web UI and set a password. But there's a couple that I really like. So when you were talking about cameras for, let's say, the panoramic ones and stuff like that, mm-hmm. I wasn't a huge fan of the panoramic ones either. Reolink has a couple of them. I decided to go with the Track Mix instead, and those are the PTR cameras, except that they will actually move on their own. So you don't actually have to do anything for them. They'll track they track people coming up to the driveway. So I have one on my driveway, and that's really the only place that I have that functionality to turn on, because you can turn that on and off. And so what happens is when it detects a person that happens on the camera, it'll follow the person and even start to zoom in on the person. So as they get closer to the house, you get a better shot of their face. And I really like that. So yes, it's an extra thing to break, but I found that the quality of video is really good. And I really like the fact that it follows my kids around the yard or whatever, right? Because I can see what are they doing over there, right? Like, that's super useful. And then they'll return back to their set point after a period of time. So I really like those. And for inside, I'm using an E1. They're called E1 Outdoor, but they basically look like a baseball on the end of a little plastic thing. And they work quite well, but there's a definite difference in the quality of the build between the Track Mix, which feels solid. Like it feels like you'd have to do some serious damage. It's also better rated for weather. Like it's got a higher IP rating and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I've been a big fan. I have 3 different types of Reolink if you include my doorbell, my wired doorbell.
So I'm a broken record here, and I know that. But I'm a huge fan of Axis cameras. We've installed them for years. Buying them new, they're very expensive. But I will tell you this, I've only ever had one die, and when it died, I contacted Axis and said, hey, this very expensive camera died, and they were quick to send a brand new one for free. It was extraordinarily hassle-free. And the other thing that I really like about Axis as a company, these are people that really take security seriously, and so you can call them, whether or not you're a customer, whether or not you buy the product, you can call them and ask them questions, and they will put you in contact with an engineer, and he'll walk you through how a thing is designed, how it works, best practices, what you can do with it, what you can't do with it, and then obviously when it comes to product stuff, you have questions about how to specifically install a thing or do a thing. We get clients all the time. We've had places that they've had Axis cameras for over 10 years, gets bought to a new place and they replace it, and we reset the cameras and add them to a new NVR, and they're back in action, and they continue to use them. So they have a really long shelf life. We have gotten recently into where if a client says, I can't afford a brand new system, we'll just sell them some used cameras. In fact, we're rehabbing a law office, and they said the same thing. They were like, hey, our competition has cameras that are X price point. Get it down to X price point. I said, are you okay with some gently used one? They said yes. And so what we've done is we just say, I'll sell you the used cameras. I'll put a better warranty on them than the Taiwanesium or Chinesium cameras. So if they guarantee 5 years, I'll guarantee 7. And let me put in used cameras. And I've yet to, well, I shouldn't say I've yet. 1 or 2 I've had where used cameras have failed. But again, they're in some cases 10 plus years old. But it's still cheaper for me to replace those than it would be for them to buy brand new ones. And we make enough money off of even selling the used ones that it works out in our favor. So I've got some links for you in the show notes, some ones that I would consider. One's $59, one's $150, and one's $40. I'd also be interested if anybody out there ever built their own. If you built a camera, I'd love to hear from you at live@asknoahshow.com. And the last plug we'll give is for a company called Foscam. I don't think Steve or I have any affiliation or connection or experience rather with Foscam. However, there is an open source piece of firmware available. We'll have links for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of March 15th, 2026, here's the Linux and open source news. Curl 8.19 is out. GIMP 3.2 is now available. Calibre 9.5 is out. OBS Studio 32.1 has been released. Qt Creator 19 is now available. KDE Frameworks 6.24 has been released. And the KDE team has also announced the release of MarkNote 1.5. In distro news, ParaOS Nice Core 26.3 has been released. Sparky Linux 2026.03 is out. The Debian team has announced the release of Debian Trixie 13.4. And Endeavor OS Titan is now available. In open source security news, CrackArmor is a critical AppArmor flaw that enables local privilege escalation to root. In open source AI news, Mistral announces Leanstral, an open source foundation for trustworthy vibe coding. NVIDIA plans NemoClaw, an open source platform for AI agents, and NVIDIA will spend $26 billion to build an open-weight AI model, according to financial filings.
That brings us to the end of this week's episode. I thank you for joining us. We record the show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. You can learn more by going to AskNoahShow.com. You missed it? That's okay. We release it as a podcast. It's available for you at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Hey, there's a bonus if you do it that way. You know what the bonus is? You get all of the articles and references we used to make the show. That's true. But you also get all the stuff we didn't get time to cover. There's a whole half of the doc we didn't even get to tonight. Well, imagine it. But it's there, and we'll be there, podcast.asknoahshow.com. Want more Steve? Find him at Linux Ovens on X, me, noahc.us. We're back next week, 6 p.m. Central, asknoahshow.com.